Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Eric with Advanced Level Auto. We're here in my office and I've got a couple of engine computers on the desk over here. Now before I get into showing you what we're going to be doing today, let me give you a little bit of a backstory. So I get a call from a shop that has a 2011 Hyundai Genesis and it's got a bad computer. So they diagnosed it as a bad computer. I didn't do the diagnostic, so I only showed up to do the cloning job. So basically, they went ahead and bought a used module from a salvage yard, and all they wanted me to do was come over and do the clone. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with what cloning an engine control module means, it's basically copying the information from one module and moving it over to the other one. Essentially, these engine computers, once they're married to a vehicle, it's very difficult many times to get them to transfer over to another vehicle because inside the memory of the computer is going to be the VIN number and also the security information for the immobilizer system. Now, this particular vehicle, even though it's a Hyundai, it is a push to start vehicle, so it does have an immobilizer system. A lot of the keys in Hyundais that are keyed ignition, they don't have chips in the key, so swapping over the computer is pretty much just plug and play. You can put it in and the car starts. However, in this case, we do have an immobilizer system, and so we need to transfer the data for the immobilizer from the original computer over to our used or new replacement computer. Now, this job normally should be pretty straightforward. Tools like this is the DC706 from OBD Star. This tool is capable of reading the information from the original computer and transferring it over to the used replacement one without having to open the computer. Essentially, we can read it in something called bench mode, where we just connect our wires to the little pins inside of the connector here. The tool will give you a diagram and show you how to hook it up. And then basically from there, it can read and extract the information from the original computer by communicating to the chip inside the computer through the connector port. Now, this chip located right here is called the MCU, and it basically holds all the data that we're looking for. Now, this one in particular is an Infineon Tri-Core TC1796. And if you guys are curious, this is what the case looks like for the computer. It is a Bosch, and the part number is an ME17.9.1. So anyways, to get back to my story, I showed up, I connected to the original computer, and found that we had no communication. This is a problem because if you cannot communicate with the computer, then there's no way to extract the information from the chip in bench mode. So once I realized that we could not communicate with the original one, at that point, I knew that this was going to be a lot more complicated. This was going to require me to have to open up the computer and see if maybe we can talk to it through BDM or in boot mode. BDM is basically where we take an adapter like this one and then we use it to put the pins on the little contact points right here. And sometimes if we can't communicate in bench mode through the front connector, we can actually communicate with the chip through these points right here. Unfortunately, for this particular computer, I could not find any tool that could support BDM mode for the ME17.9.1. Now, I also tried to communicate with it in boot mode, which meant going to the boot pin on the chip over here to put the chip into boot mode, but even doing that, I still had no communication. Now, when I opened up this computer, it was pretty obvious what was wrong. We had some kind of short that happened on the circuit board and it burned up a capacitor. Not only did it burn up the capacitor, but it actually did a lot of damage to the board. I'll put some pictures up here to show you guys what it looked like when I first opened up this computer. Basically, there was a spot on the circuit board where the capacitor was attached, and that spot was completely burned through. You can even see on the case where it left a burn mark. Look at that, that's pretty gnarly. Anyway, after seeing the damage that was done and the hole that was burned through the computer, I removed the capacitor and I picked away at all the material that was burned up. And I found that it did some pretty extensive damage to the board itself. Now, these boards are actually multi-layer circuit boards, meaning that there's several layers that are sandwiched together. And so basically, I think what happened was the layers actually got shorted together. You can see on the board right here where a hole was burned through and how some of the layers of the actual board started to come apart. This is basically what the hole looked like once I chipped away all of the burned material. And as you guys can see, if you take a look right over here on the board, you can see that there were some traces that were damaged. And so basically what I tried to do is I tried to repair those traces by just jumpering some wires. That's what all this is right here. So those traces that got damaged right there, I basically just jumpered them. I followed where they came from and I ran a jumper wire from one end to the other end. These were my attempts to repair this in order to try to get this thing to communicate. And let me tell you guys, I spent a long time trying to get this thing to talk, searching for bad components on this board. But in the end, there was nothing I could do to get this thing to talk. So it was at that point that I started thinking about maybe just transplanting the chip. Like I mentioned before, guys, this MCU holds all the information that we need. So if we basically just transfer it over to our used replacement computer, this, by the way, is a known good computer. It does communicate, it does talk. I just wanted to know if it's possible to transfer this chip over to this computer and see if it'll communicate. Now, you guys might be asking, why at this point don't they just buy a new computer? Well, according to what they told me, the dealer wants way too much money for it. I think it was somewhere around like $1,500. And to top that off, they don't even have it in stock. They don't have a time frame as to when they can actually get one. And this customer really needs to get this thing back on the road. So the shop wanted me to see if there was anything that we could do. Now, to be honest with you guys, I have never transplanted this type of MCU before. A typical MCU on a circuit board is going to look something like this, where it's got a bunch of little tiny legs all the way around it, and it can be easily removed. Well, with some skill, it can be removed and transplanted to another computer. It can actually even be tested while it's still on the board, because we have all these contacts around the chip, these little legs. We have certain tools that we can use to read the chips by connecting to the little legs on the MCU and reading the data from it. Now, the problem with the style of chip that's on this particular computer is that we don't have any legs going around it. The contact points are actually hidden underneath this chip. This is what's called a BGA chip. Now, BGA is basically a surface mounted chip by which the solder points or the contact points are actually underneath the chip. So there's no real way that you can test this chip to tell whether it's good or not. Part of my dilemma that I have here is that, it's possible that whenever this board shorted out, it could have shorted out this chip and burned it up. But there's no real way for me to test it unless I transplant it over to the other computer and see if we can communicate with it. Now, transplanting a BGA chip is something that takes a lot of serious skill and a lot of practice. It also requires special tools like this stencil frame right here. I've got a couple of different ones. So there's this one right here that uses a stencil that goes at the top. And we have this one right here, which you can also put the stencil in at the top. Basically, you put your chip right here in the middle, use the stencil, and you can either use something like a solder paste, or in our case, we're gonna be using these BGA solder balls. So this is a technique that's called reballing, and you can see why it's called reballing is because you're using little solder balls and you're dropping them into the frame here, and the little solder balls are gonna fall into their respective spots, and then you're gonna solder them into place. Now that sounds easy enough, but let me tell you guys, it is not. This is a very difficult process, and I've been at this thing for like 2 weeks now. So what I've done just to practice is I actually removed the chip from the used replacement computer, and I've been practicing reballing on this chip. I've probably reballed this chip at least 10 times already, and I've only been successful about 3 out of those 10 times. As you can see, this is the result of my last attempt, where I think I finally figured out the correct method to get this to work right. Again, if you look closely at this chip, you can see we have a bunch of little solder balls. Those are the contacts that are going to sit on the board. So you got to make sure that these solder balls are in the exact correct position. Now, these BGA frames, they come with a bunch of these different little grids. Let me show them to you real quick. So I've got a bunch of these little plates that come in all different styles for different types of chips. Now, unfortunately, none of these stencils were an exact fit for our chip. So I basically had to find the closest stencil in the kit. And I used some of this high heat captain's tape to tape off the stencil. And then I basically cut out the section where I wanted the balls to fall in. Now, these two different frames do pretty much the same job, but they just do it in a different way. Honestly, I prefer this one right here over this one, only because I really don't like the way this thing holds the chip in. It doesn't grip it very tightly. This frame does a way better job of holding the chip in place, and it works with just one jack screw that you tighten and loosen to hold the chip into place. I'll show you guys that in a second here. But just to cut to the point, these big stencils that fit inside the frame that work with this tool, although they may work for some people, in my case, I really just could not get this to work the way I needed it to, because every time I would lift up the frame, a lot of the balls would stay stuck on the stencil, and no matter what I did, I just couldn't ever get the result that I wanted. What I ended up finding was this little stencil here that came in another kit. Now, this stencil obviously doesn't sit inside that frame. It just sits right on top of the chip, and it came out of this other kit that I purchased that had a bunch of different style of stencils. And so even though this stencil wasn't exactly made for our chip, it was the correct grid spacing, the correct size. The only thing extra that it had is that it had one row of holes. Let me see if I can show you guys the magnifying glass. So if you take a look, you can see that there's an extra row right there that I basically just taped it off, just using some of that high heat captain's tape. So if you guys are doing this and you run across this where you don't have the exact stencil, but it's the correct size, the correct grid spacing and everything, maybe it's just got an extra row or something, well, you can just tape that off. So anyway, just to cut to the point here, essentially, I'm going to be transferring this chip over to this board right here. Hopefully this chip isn't fried, and hopefully we can get it to talk. If we can, that's going to be awesome. If we can't, then, well, at least we know we tried. Again, reballing these chips is a technique that You know, I only started a couple weeks ago practicing. I just dropped the chip there. Yeah, don't worry about this chip, guys. This one is the one that came off of the used computer, so it's no good to us anyway. And honestly, I'm pretty sure that I might have burned up this chip by overheating it so many times because, again, I'm telling you, I reballed this chip at least 10 times over and over again to get the correct technique down to get these type of results right here. Trust me, results like this were not found by me doing this just one time. This right here is 2 weeks of me practicing to get it right. And again, I was practicing on this chip that came off of this used computer that, you know, it was of no use to us anyway. So if I was going to be practicing on something, I would rather be practicing on this one before I even try to mess with this one over here. Yeah, so anyways, I figured I'd bring you guys along, show you what it takes to, you know, reball these types of chips. And you can watch me either, you know, succeed in doing this or fail miserably. Either way, this ought to be fun, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, guys, so we're going to start out by removing the chip that we want to transplant. So again, this is our original computer. I'm not going to bother, you know, taping this computer off the way I did with our replacement computer. So this is our used replacement computer. As you can see, I put this high heat resistance captain's tape all the way around the board because I wanted to protect all of the other components that were around the MCU from getting displaced or becoming damaged. Yeah, we don't have to worry about that with this board because, again, it's got a big hole in it. So, you know, there's not much else we can do to damage this thing. It's already toast. And hopefully our chip is not toast. But again, there's only one way to find out. We got to take it off and we're going to have to transplant it. So in order to remove this, we're going to be using a high heat gun and tons of flux. So I'm basically just going to kind of heat up the area right now. Let me turn the air up a little bit. It does take quite a bit of heat to get these chips to come off. So we want to be very careful to not overheat it and damage the chip. Okay, so now that we have it pretty much heated up, I'm going to go ahead and take some of this flux, and we're going to start by kind of just getting the flux on this end of the chip right here. So we're going to put a bunch of flux right there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the high heat gun, and we're going to melt that flux into or under the chip. So I'm going to hold the board at an angle, and then we're going to heat up that flux, and then we're going to let it kind of make its way under the chip, so that we can get inside of those little solder balls. We want to get that flux underneath the chip. Okay, so you can see it all melted away right there. Let's put a little bit more. Heat it up, melt it. Let it go underneath the chip. Then I'm going to do basically the same thing all the way around the chip. So we're going to come to the bottom side of the chip here, and we're going to put some flux. I'm going to heat it up, melt that flux, let it make its way underneath the chip, put some more. The more flux, the better. You can see it's already oozing out of the other side of the chip. That's a good sign. That means that it's making its way all the way underneath the chip. It's penetrating to the other side. That's what we want to see. Now let's tilt it this way, put some flux on this side. Heat that sucker up. Now just one more side. Hit it with the heat. You see how it's oozing out of the other side? That's what we want to see. That means that we're getting full penetration. Let's do one more line of this flux on this end right here. Heat it up. There we go. That looks good. By the way, I do have this special adapter that's made for heating up chips, but it doesn't really work that great. I actually prefer to just use this type of tip. This is just using a square tip. So as long as you keep it moving, don't stay concentrated in one spot too long. Like I mentioned before, it is going to take a lot of heat for this chip to come loose. I'm just going to take some tweezers and see if it's coming loose yet. A little bit. Now you don't want to pull it too hard or pull it while it's still stuck to the board, because you know, if you do that, you can pull the contacts off of the board, or you can pull the contacts off of the actual chip. You know, you want to make sure that you're fully separated, or the solder is fully melted before you actually try to lift the chip. You can see the one side of the chip is wanting to lift up, but we're not going to force it. We're just gonna wait until that solder heats up and this chip fully disconnects. We don't want to go ripping any pads. It's starting to come up. Again, I'm not gonna force it. There we go. Alright. You see how easy that's coming up now? Now I'm gonna go ahead and just lift up the chip. And there we have it. Alright, so check it out. So this was actually a pretty clean removal of this chip. We don't have any solder left on it, really. Normally, when I pull these off, there's going to be a lot of solder left on it, and then we have to use a wick to remove the solder. We do have a little bit here on the corner. Actually, we have 2 little solder balls that stayed stuck. And honestly, I think we might have lifted the pads on that corner. Let's take a look at the board. Yeah, so taking a closer look at the board, you can see all of our solder balls are still attached to the board, except the 2 on that upper right-hand corner. We might have lifted those pads on that corner. This board is junk, by the way, so I don't really care if we pulled any pads off of it, but it really felt like it came off pretty easy. Like I didn't have to struggle to get it off. I don't know why we would have pulled any pads off of it. But anyway, let's go ahead and get this chip cleaned up, and then we'll start the process of reballing. I'm just gonna use a rag and some isopropyl alcohol. We're just gonna clean it up, get all that flux off of there. Here we go. All right, so we're gonna bring out our frame. Now let's go ahead and put our chip into place. So basically this thing holds onto the edges of the chip, so we're gonna drop it in like that. Okay, so now that we have our chip set in place, we're gonna go ahead and tighten down this little jack screw, and that's going to hold our chip firmly in place. So I'm gonna put a little bit of flux around this chip here, just to make sure we get all of the old solder off. I'm gonna heat up my soldering iron. Then I'm gonna take a little piece of this easy braid. This is a braided wick. This is what we're gonna use to suck up the old solder. So I'm basically just gonna heat it up with the heat gun, or excuse me, the soldering iron. And we're going to go across all of these pads, and we're gonna suck up any of the old solder that's left over. Again, we had a pretty clean removal this time. Normally when I remove these chips, there's a bunch of solder left over on the chip. In this case, we don't really have much of any solder left over. I don't know where that went. Just grab another piece. Heat that sucker up. And then just kind of go all the way around the chip. Make sure we get everything off. And that should do it. Let's just clean up the chip with some more alcohol. I'm just going to take my rag and clean off all of that flux. Do a little bit more. Looking good. Alright, so now that we got our chip nice and clean, let's go ahead and put a little bit of flux on there. Now this flux is going to be used to hold the solder balls into place, and it's also going to be used to help them bond into place. Now, the important thing is that we don't want to put too much, because otherwise if you put too much flux, the solder balls are going to float and they're not going to really stick to the chip. So we basically just want to have like a nice thin layer. I'm just going to take my finger and kind of run it across the chip here, and again, we just want a nice thin layer of flux. Just wipe it one more time. That should be good. Now, like I said, the method of using this small stencil is what's been working for me. So I'm just going to stick to that method, and I'm basically just going to line up the stencil to the pads on the chip. I don't know if you guys can see right there. That's where we want to be. Hopefully you guys can see that. So I'm just going to take a couple pieces of tape. There's 1, 2, and I'm going to use that tape to hold the stencil into place. So I'm going to put one here on this corner. Be careful not to move the stencil. That'll hold that into place right there. And then on the other side, whoop, I moved it right there. Just like that. That is looking good. Perfect. Now at this point, we're going to take our solder balls and we're going to sprinkle some of these solder balls onto the chip or onto the stencil, and then we're going to use this brush to kind of move these balls all the way around the stencil and just kind of get the balls to fall into place. Put a little more balls on there. Just trying to fill all the spaces. Let me try using this one right here. Sometimes you need something a little stronger than a brush. As you can see, we're basically just trying to get all the little holes filled up in the stencil. So if we take a closer look, you can see, well, we're still missing a couple of beads. One right there, one over here up in the corner, and that looks like it. Let me go ahead and manually place those balls. So I'm just going to take some tweezers and then we're going to place the balls manually. Okay, so all of our balls are placed in our stencil. And now we're just going to heat up our balls until they melt into place. All right, so we're going to let that cool off for a second. Now what I like to do is take some tweezers and just make sure that all of the balls are soldered into place. You can see these up here are still loose, so they're not fully soldered into place. Okay, so let's give it some more heat. All right, so we gave this thing a little bit of time to cool off. Now let's go ahead and see if we can separate the stencil from the chip. So I'm gonna peel this tape right here. Well, the whole chip came off, so yeah. We're gonna have to try to separate the stencil from the chip. So let me grab this little blade right here and see if we can get in between without damaging our freshly soldered beads. So let's just get in there, come on. Very gently try to separate it. I can already see it looks like one ball might have stuck to the stencil. Or maybe a couple, let's see. Yeah, we got one ball that stayed stuck to the stencil. I don't know if you guys can see that right there. No big deal, we'll place that ball manually. Let me take a quick look under the microscope. Looks like we did a pretty clean job. We just have that one ball missing. So let me go ahead and place that ball. I'm gonna place this back down on the frame. Just gonna put a small dab of flux on there, just barely any. Just enough for the ball to stick. And we're just gonna grab one of these little balls and we're just gonna drop it into place right there. And that looks good. Now let's give it some heat. Don't get too close with the air because you don't want to blow the ball off of the pad. Okay, I think that should do it. Okay, so now we have all of our balls soldered into place. Now, what I like to do, if you guys noticed, they're still kind of pretty dull. What I like to do is take some flux and then I'm just gonna go all the way around and we're gonna give it a nice coating of flux. Then we're just gonna heat it up one last time, get that flux to melt, cover all of the contacts, bring that solder back to life. And this is also going to help the solder bond better to the chip. And that should do it. So we're going to let this thing cool off. All right, so now that it cooled down, we're going to go ahead and clean it up. So I'm going to drop some isopropyl in there. And I'm just going to take a normal toothbrush and we're going to brush off all that flux. All right, so there's our chip. And as you can see, we did a pretty good job, but we actually have a couple of balls missing right on this upper corner right here. I know it's kind of hard to tell, but yeah, I'm gonna have to place 2 more balls right there. Actually, there's 3 balls because one down here is missing too. So let me go ahead and place those balls and I'll be right back. All right, guys, so fast forward. As you can see, I've got the chip fully reballed. It is now ready to be placed on the board. I think we did a pretty good job. These solder balls are perfectly placed and they are 100% bonded to the chip. Yeah, take a look from this angle. You can see they are perfectly aligned. So let's go ahead and place the chip. All right, guys, so I've got our new or used replacement computer right here. We're going to clean it up a little bit because there's still a little bit of solder on these pads here. So I'm just gonna take some flux and we're going to spread some around. Then we're going to take a piece of this braided wick, and with the soldering iron, we're going to soak up whatever solder is left on these pads. Let this get nice and hot, and then just gently go around and let it soak up all of the solder. It's like this one is full now. You can see all that solder it's soaked up. Let's grab another piece. Looking good. Just gonna use these little alcohol pads. Our board is nice and clean. Now it's time for what I would call the most difficult part, and that is placing the chip. Some manufacturers will actually draw an outline for where the chip should be placed. You'll see that when it comes to like gaming consoles and stuff like that. But in our case, the manufacturer didn't give us an outline. So I'm pretty much just gonna have to eyeball this and hope that we get this chip right on the correct contacts. And we're also gonna have to make sure that we heat this up enough. You can't heat it up too much because you can damage the chip, but then if you don't heat it up enough, you won't make good contacts. So you kind of gotta find that in between. So I'm just gonna put a little bit of flux, a dab here, and a little dab on each side. Again, you don't want to have too much flux here. We just want a nice thin layer across all of the pads here. Okay, that's looking good. Let's go ahead and lay the chip down. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball this here. Okay, so I think we got our chip placement right. Let's go ahead and start heating this thing up. All right, guys, so it looks like we did a pretty good job of placing the chip. I feel like all the solder balls fell into their place. I know it's really difficult to see, but if you look at it from the side, barely make out those solder balls right there. The only way for us to find out is to go ahead and hook it up on the bench and see if it communicates. All right, guys, so here's the moment of truth. I've got the computer connected to the MP001, and that's connected to the OBD star, the DC706. We've got it wired up just like the diagram shows us, so let's go ahead and see if we can connect to this thing. Like I said before, we had no communication at all. Bam, there we go. We got communication. Guys, before it did not do this. Now it's writing to the bootloader, verifying the password. There's our unique chip ID number, and ECU connection is successful. All right, guys. All right. Wow. Oh my gosh. You guys don't understand. I really did not think that this was going to work. Honestly, I've been practicing this method for the last 2 weeks trying to perfect it. Although I'm not perfect, I think I got it just good enough to get the job done. So now we can go ahead and read the internal EEPROM and the internal flash, and we're going to back those up. So right now it's communicating, and it's going to attempt to read the EEPROM. There it is. It's reading the sectors of the EEPROM. 90%. Come on, baby. Come on. Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Let's save this data. And we're going to read the internal flash. As you can see, it's writing to the bootloader. So there's 13 sectors. It's going to go through each sector and read the flash data. I'm going to let this thing finish and we'll come back when it's ready. All right, guys, so fast forward. We've got the flash and the EEPROM, everything backed up. Now, the reason that I'm backing up the data for the chip is because, you know, if anything happens to this computer, or maybe if my soldering wasn't 100% and, you know, something happens and the chip stops communicating, well, I have a backup here, and we can always buy another used module, and then we can write that flash and the EEPROM into that used module. This function, by the way, guys, to write the VIN number does not work. I tried to do that on the used module. The VIN number is not the only thing that you need to transfer. You also need to transfer the immobilizer data, so this wouldn't have helped anyway. So anyway, at this point, I'm going to put this computer back together. We're going to stick it into the car and see if it starts. All right, guys, so we made it back over to the shop. We're going to go ahead and install our computer. So here's our Hyundai Genesis. All right, so I went ahead and I installed the computer. We just kind of got it hanging in here. I'm not going to put the bracket on just yet. I want to make sure that it's going to start first now. I think the battery's dead, so let me get my jump pack. Okay, so I've got my jump pack connected to our jumping points over here. Let's go ahead and switch it on. Yeah, you can see that it's at 1.9 volts, so this thing was completely dead. Flick it on, and let's move inside. All right, so I've got the key right here. We're going to go ahead and just set it down, and let's see if this thing starts. Bam! Just like that, this thing started right up. Awesome. Check this out, guys. The engine is running. Our job here is done. That is a fix. So just like that, we were able to get the car running. Now, I know I made it look easy in this video, but this was like 2 weeks of me practicing soldering those chips, doing the BGA, Reball, and all of that stuff. So, you know, I'm really happy with the result because honestly, at a certain point, I didn't think that I was going to be able to do this, and really, I wasn't even going to film this because I didn't think that it was going to work. But I figured, you know what, even if it doesn't work, I want to film it because I want to show you guys the process of reballing because, like I said, guys, I spent a lot of time practicing and practicing trying to get the technique right. And so even if everything turned out to be a failure, I still wanted to show you guys the process and how it's done. I know the customer is going to be happy. The shop's going to be happy that they can finally get this car out of here. We can all get paid and move on to the next one. Anyways, guys, like I always say, thank you for watching the video. I hope you found it useful, informational, educational, entertaining. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.